Hello, good morning to everyone. So glad that we're here for this morning's Shop Talk. Can I ask everyone to quiet down and turn the attention up to here, because we're now going to begin our wonderful morning of hearing from our speakers whose ideas today will share with us insights into the very process of creativity. Is it an act of imitation that takes the world around us as a point of departure, or instead is it one of generation, producing something new, beyond what nature can provide? As we have seen increasingly in recent Shop Talks, today's discussion will approach these topics from both scholarly and artistic perspectives, and will focus today in particular at intersections between poetry and visual art. We will hear first from Arianna Brunori, this year's Franco Zeffirelli Italian Fellow and a scholar of medieval and early modern Italian culture, she's fresh off the boat, having arrived on the 27th of March, so this may be, for some of you, a first introduction to her work. Arianna has a formation in philosophy, which she pursued at La Sapienza University in Rome and later at the Scuola Normale Superiore in Pisa, where she earned her doctorate in 2022. Most recently, Arianna held a postdoctoral research position at the Istituto Italiano per gli Studi Storici in Naples, and since 2019, she has also held research positions at Princeton University, the Martin Buber Institute in Cologne, and Tel Aviv University. Throughout these experiences, Arianna has delved into the world of Dante's Commedia to understand how the poet's work integrates literature, art, and history, as well as the reception of Dante's writing among Italian Jews from the 14th through the 17th centuries. At the Academy, Arianna will expand her thinking beyond Dante to look at the intersection of art and alchemy in the medieval world, as we will hear from her today. Second, we will hear from Robin Schiff, this year's Joseph Brodsky Rome Prize winner, a gift of the Drew Hines Trust. A poet, Robin shares Arianna's fascination, I learned, with medieval history, in which she earned her master's degree from the University of Bristol. But as we have come to know in recent months, Robin has evolved into a poet with a great gift for keen observation of detail, in part through academic positions at Northwestern University, the University of Iowa, and Emory University, where she presently is a professor of English. Robin has published 3 books of poetry, Worth and Revolver with the University of Iowa Press, and A Woman of Property, published with Penguin Books in 2016. Dan Kiassen, poetry critic for The New Yorker, which, along with the Chicago Tribune, named her book among the best books of poetry the year it was published, summarized the emotional charge and universal condition of Robin's poetry this way, quote, "We've all had the experience of trying to power down our minds before sleep. Schiff has made an art of that anxious, self-patrolling state," end quote. The alchemic power of her poems to turn domestic experience into something sublime has earned Robin a host of accolades, including an Arts and Humanities Initiative Award from the University of Iowa, and residencies at McDowell and Yaddo, the latter of which welcomed her 2 times. These experiences, like so many intricacies of her daily life, have inspired Robin's latest work, Information Desk, which she will discuss this morning. Please welcome me first welcoming Arianna to the poem, followed by Robin, after which we will welcome them both for questions. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank the whole community of the Academy for this amazing opportunity to present and discuss the research on which I intend to work on the following months. So this is the title. For more than 2,000 years, the Aristotelian idea that art imitates nature has governed the Western understanding of an impressive variety of phenomena, both in the domain that today we would strictly define as artistic and in the juridical, philosophical, technical fields. In fact, not only the Greek word used by Aristotle, techne, stands for a very broad range of human activities, but also the verb mimetai can mean imitating, representing, reproducing, counterfeiting, and so on. For this reason, it has been argued that the Aristotelian principle has represented for a long period of European history something like a social total fact, to use the expression coined by the French anthropologist Marcel Mauss. Even today, despite the fact that artistic avant-gardes and bioengineering have questioned in different ways the Aristotelian assumption, the idea that nature can in some way provide a paradigm for technological development, even if only in a normative and moral sense, continues to be widespread. This is one of the reasons why, in the research I hope to carry out at the Academy, I would like to start reconstructing, from a quite specific point of view, one of the fundamental turning points of the long and problematic history of the principle art imitates nature. That is to say, the period between the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance. As I would like to show, this is a period of transition between a conception that is still the ancient one, according to which human arts, for the most part, are unable to compete with nature, to a radically innovative conception, which will be that of the 17th century and Descartes, for example, according to which not only art is able to surpass nature, but nature itself can be thought of as a great machine, a set of mechanical processes. In particular, in my study, I intend to focus on two categories, that of visual artists and that of alchemists, who both challenge, in different ways, the Platonic idea according to which art, while imitating nature, is always condemned to remain below it. In fact, during the Renaissance, visual artists, questioning the traditional interpretation of the Aristotelian principle, started to present themselves as perfect imitators of nature, or, in some cases, even as its refiners or masters. On the other hand, alchemists, accused since the Middle Ages of wanting to compete with God, have always had a similar claim, that is to say, that of artificially producing metals perfectly equivalent to the natural ones, especially gold and silver. For this reason, it has been argued that alchemists and artists were united by a shared view of human creativity. Upon closer analysis, however, the relationship between artists and alchemists during the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance appears anything but peaceful. If it is true that these figures are often found working within the same courts, united by the interest in certain technical processes relating to the production of pigments, metalworking, and precious materials imitations manufacture, there is a real competition between them. In my research, I would like to retrace in detail this varied debate, at the center of which lies the common claim to operate in a manner identical or superior to nature. The aim is not only to study the network of relationships in which its protagonists, alchemists, painters, metallurgists, ceramists, and men of letters are inserted, but first and foremost to shed light on the shifting distinction between natural and artificial reproduction, namely between generation and imitation in the early modern period. I would like to start with the Commedia, the literary plays that set this research in motion. In Inferno 29, in the 10th Bolgia, Dante meets two alchemists, convicted for their counterfeiting activity, intent on scratching themselves furiously because of a terrible scabies they are suffering from. The first is Griffolino da Siena, the second remains unknown until the very last verses of the canto, when making the request to be observed carefully, he reveals his identity to Dante. Let's read the verses. But that thou know who thus doth second thee against the Sienese, make sharp thine eye towards me, so that my face will answer thee. And thou shalt see I am Capocchio's shade, who metals falsified by alchemy. Thou must remember, if I well describe thee, how high a skilful ape of nature was. A man named Capocchio was actually sentenced to death in Siena in 1293 as a coin forger. However, the reference to his acquaintance with Dante remains mysterious. It is not by chance that around these verses, the ancient commentators of the Commedia have exercised their imagination, now hypothesizing a common attendance of the art school of doctors and apothecaries, now less soberly imagining, as in the case of Benvenuto da Imola, the circumstances and details of a real dialogue. Let's read Benvenuto da Imola's commentary. Once, on a Good Friday, while he was alone in a cloister and immersed in his own thoughts, Capocchio painted with extraordinary skill the whole process of Christ's Passion on his nails. And when Dante, coming towards him, said, "What are you doing?" Capocchio immediately erased with his tongue everything he had done with so much effort of his own ingenuity. For which Dante reproached him harshly, because that work seemed to him no less admirable than that of the man who transcribed the whole Iliad in such minute characters that it could be enclosed in a nutshell, or that of the man who made ants out of ivory. For this reason, Capocchio says, how high a skillful ape of nature was, that is to say, counterfeiting everything just as an ape does. And finally, note here, reader, that Dante, who calls this man ape of nature, truly seems to me to have been himself a more able ape than anyone else ever, in that he was able to know and admirably and profoundly the natures of human beings of any condition, profession, and fortune, and to represent as usefully as pleasantly their customs, acts, and characters. As argued by the great Italian historian Carlo Ginzburg, the episode narrated by Benvenuto in the first half of the 14th century is inspired, in all probability, by chapter 17 of book 14 of Boccaccio's Genealogia Deorum Gentilium. In fact, in that chapter of his work, Boccaccio, arguing against those theologians who had accused Dante of deceptively seducing his readers, rejected the idea according to which poets are nothing but philosophers' apes, proposing instead to consider them, due to their mimetic abilities, apes of nature. In this sense, the episode narrated by Benvenuto highlights a central fact. For the commentator, Capocchio is the antipode and at the same time the prefiguration of Dante himself. The alchemist is an ape of nature, as Dante is, but the latter surpasses him by virtue of his extraordinary ability to imitate all kinds of human beings, whatever their condition, profession, or fortune. But why, and this is the question I would like you to keep in mind, does Benvenuto imagine Capocchio holding a paintbrush, that is to say, passing from the role of alchemist to that of painter? The answer I would like to show might be found in one of the most important French medieval literary works, Les Romans de la Rose. As many of you may know, Les Romans de la Rose is a long allegorical poem started in 1237 by Guillaume de Loris and completed by Jean de Meaux around 1280, which tells the story of an almost endless erotic quest. Among the numerous allegorical characters encountered by the lover during his search for the rose, i.e., for the loved woman, we find nature, intent on forging individuals to ensure the perpetuity of species against the destructive work of death. When nature, sweet and compassionate, sees that envious death and corruption come together to put to destruction whatever they find within her forge, she continues always to hammer and forge and always to renew the individuals by means of new generation. When she can bring no other counsel to her work, she cuts copies in such letters that she gives them true forms in coins of different monies. From these, art makes her models, but she does not make her forms as true. However, with very attentive care, she kneels before nature and like a truant beggar, pouring in knowledge and force, she begs and requests and asks of her. She struggles to follow her so that nature may wish to teach her how, with her ability, she may properly subsume all creatures in her figures. She also watches how nature works, for she would like very much to perform such a work, and she imitates her like a monkey. But her sense is so bare and feeble that she cannot make living things, no matter how newborn they seem. As can be seen in this passage, the digression and the contrast between nature and death gives rise to a further digression, this time relating to the relationship between art and nature, which occupies many of the subsequent verses. Art, writes Jean, no matter how hard she tries, with great study and great effort, to make anything whatever, no matter what shapes they have, whether she paints, dyes, forges, or shapes, will never make them go by themselves. Love, move, feel, and talk. As we have seen, Jean uses metaphors drawn from human techniques to represent the activity of nature. Nature forges, hammers, and mints individuals as if they were coins. However, like most of his contemporaries, Jean believes that the relationship of analogy between art and nature is biased in favor of the latter. No matter how hard she tries, art will never be able to completely imitate nature. However, it is interesting that, as soon as he formulates it, Jean feels the need to limit the universal value of this statement. Nevertheless, it is a notable thing, writes Jean, that alchemy is a true art. Whoever walked wisely in it would find great miracles. For, however it goes with species, the individuals at least, when they undergo intelligent operations, are changeable into many forms. They can so alter their appearances by various transformations that this change puts them into entirely different species and robs them of the original species. Alchemy, unlike all the other arts, and in particular unlike the mimetic arts, which paint, dye, forge, and shape, is able to perfectly imitate nature, transmuting, if not the species, at least the individuals that belong to this species, that is to say, the individual pieces of metals. But where does this distinction come from? It is impossible to determine it with certainty. However, as shown by William Newman, this distinction is found almost identically in the 13th century alchemical text, Teorica et Practica, by the Franciscan friar Paul of Taranto. In fact, Paul distinguishes between arts that, by manipulating superficial qualities such as color and volume, result in the generation of a more extrinsic form, such as painting and sculpture, and arts instead, such as alchemy itself, that are capable to produce an intrinsic substantial form. In other words, if Aristotle in the Physics had distinguished between the arts that carry things further than nature can and those that merely imitate nature, Paul, in the attempt to ennoble alchemy and assimilate it to perfective arts, such as medicine and agriculture, discredits the visual arts, capable only of imposing accidental forms on matter from the outside, but not to draw forth the substantial forms lurking within it. My hypothesis is that it is in these passages that has to be found the answer to the question why Benvenuto da Imola decided in his commentary to imagine Capocchio as a painter. In fact, if the alchemists, in order to ennoble their discipline, claimed to be capable of transforming metals, in contrast to visual artists, presenting Capocchio as a painter from Benvenuto's point of view must have meant reaffirming the accusation against the deceptive nature of alchemy. But how did visual artists respond to the alchemist's accusation? How I intend to demonstrate in the second part of my research, unlike what generally happens in Northern Europe, in Italy and France, the artist's polemic does not simply echo the humanist condemnations of the alchemist's greed, but it develops in an original key, through the reappropriation of the arguments addressed by the alchemists themselves against the visual arts. I could cite different cases. Leonardo da Vinci, for example, in a passage of an anatomical manuscript, moving from the observation that alchemists are not able to produce simple things, as they claim, but only compounds, stigmatizes their pretension to have the power to create. The passage raises both the question relating to Leonardo's knowledge of alchemical literature, as well as the question relating to his perception of the contradiction between the criticism of the impious claims of alchemy and his personal pretense as a painter of a semi-divine creative power. Similarly, the famous metallurgist Bannoccio Biringuccio, in his treatise De la Pyrotechnia, while recognizing the numerous technical advantages that alchemy brought to humanity and quoting alchemical classics such as the Summa Perfectionis, refuses to alchemists the capacity to reproduce natural processes because, I quote, nature works from within, while alchemical art, which is very weak in comparison, follows nature trying to imitate it, but in an external and superficial way. Particularly significant is the case of Bernard Palissy, one of the most celebrated French ceramists of the 16th century. In one of his Discours admirables, he has one of the characters of the dialogue say, "Do you think I want to believe a Geber, an Arnaud de Villeneuve, or a Roman de la Rose, which are all alchemical sources, when they speak against the works of God? And you think I'm so ignorant that I don't know that gold, silver, and all other metals are a work of God, and that it is temerarious to try to usurp the glory of God in the realm that belongs to it. In fact, all that is granted to the human being to be able to do with respect to metals is to eliminate the impure parts, to purify and examine them, and to form with them those vases or those coins which he deems appropriate, which is a thing similar to the harvesting and plantation of crops. Because it is only up to the human being to separate the wheat from the straw, the bran from the flour, and from the flour to make bread, and to press the bunches of grapes to obtain wine. But it is up to God to give these things growth, flavor, and color. I therefore say that the human being can do nothing in these things, as well as towards metals." As Palissy also writes in La Récepte Véritable, neither painters, nor embroiderers, nor alchemists can imitate the colors of stones, snakes, caterpillars, and butterflies. However, in Palissy, even more evidently than in Leonardo and Biringuccio, the antagonism towards alchemy is accompanied by a reappropriation of their goals. In fact, in his dialogue, Architecture et Ordonnance, while describing a grotto he had planned to build for the Duc de Montmorency, the potter boasts the ability to create human and animal figures identical to the natural ones, not only for their external appearance, but also for their internal one. "Does this work look beautiful to you?" Palissy writes. "Yes, and very strange. Then he said to me, 'It is stranger than you think, because the veins, figures, and decorations that appear on the outside are also incorporated inside.' Then he took a piece of one of these works, and having broken it into several parts, he showed me the truth of the thing. For wherever the piece was broken, veins and figures were seen in all parts of the fragments, as if it had been a natural stone, which I thought was very strange and admirable." Many centuries earlier, in his treatise on the natural faculties, the Roman physician Galen, in order to contrast the work of nature with that of human beings, had taken sculpture as an example of the latter, unable to intervene on matter from within and forced to limit itself to a surface decoration. In this sense, Palissy is evidently presenting his own art, ceramics, as extraneous to the art-nature antinomy, that is to say, capable, unlike all the other techniques, of competing with the work of God. One might wonder how these controversies are reflected outside the artistic and alchemical fields. As I intend to show in the third part of my research, during the 16th century, not only did the idea that the visual arts are able to operate on matter from within, exactly like nature, spread in the literary critical field, but this idea in turn led to a paradoxical re-evaluation of the counterfeiting practices of alchemists. Exemplary from this point of view is above all the case of the scholar Benedetto Varchi. Varchi is known, among other things, for the first commentary on Michelangelo's most known sonnet, Non all'ottimo artista, in which Michelangelo declares how the task of sculpture consists only in extracting the concept that is already contained within the marble block. The best of artists never has a concept a single marble block does not contain inside its husk, but to it may attain only if and follows the intellect. Varchi, in his renowned lecture held at the Accademia Fiorentina in 1547, explains Michelangelo's sonnet in philosophical terms. According to Michelangelo, Varchi says, "It is therefore nothing else to generate or to do anything than to take this thing out of its potential being and give it the actual existence, or rather its real being." As I have tried to demonstrate elsewhere, Varchi's explanation of Michelangelo's conception of sculpture takes up the observations already matured by Varchi in his commentary on Canto 25 of Dante's Purgatorio, dedicated to the issue of the formation of the human body and the genesis of the souls. All the natural forms, except the intellectual soul which comes from outside, are extracted from the potency of matter, in such a way that the father, or the informative virtue, does nothing other than reduce to act and extract from matter what was previously in potentiality contained within it. And here is the end of the exposition of these verses of Dante, Varchi writes. In other words, for Varchi, a same model presides over artificial and natural reproduction. Likewise, the physiological theory expounded by Dante, the aesthetic one condensed by Michelangelo in Non ha l'ottimo artista, can be clarified by the principle according to which generating means nothing other than extracting a form from the potency of matter. That is to say that, according to Varchi, even sculptural art does not impose forms on matter from the outside, but draws forth these forms from its bosom, imitating not only the natura naturata, that is to say, the generated nature, but also and especially the natura naturans, nature that generates itself. The ambiguity of the term reproduction, which means both generation and imitation, allows Varchi to blur the distinction between natural and mimetic processes. This can be clearly seen, and I come to the end, also in another work by Varchi, the Questione sull'alchimia, the result of Varchi's conversations with different personalities, including Vannoccio Biringuccio. Here, the idea of an analogy between artistic and natural reproduction leads Varchi to an unprecedented re-evaluation of the so-called sophistical alchemy, that branch of alchemy traditionally universally despised, even by the alchemists themselves, which does not produce metals identical to the natural ones, but confines itself to imitating them. The second kind of alchemy, which is called sophistical, i.e. apparent and not true, is that which does not truly change or transform the substance of metals, but only their accidents, and does not make real metals, but only similar to the natural ones. And this kind of alchemy, since it is much less perfect than the first, that is to say, true alchemy, is also much easier, despite the fact that it is very difficult in many parts. This kind of alchemy, when directed to a good end, can be a source of much pleasure and utility through its beautiful and almost divine operations, both for the world and for those who practice it. While, when it is twisted towards a bad end, causes displeasure, damage, and very great dishonor through its diabolical operations, both for those who practice it and for the world. Cristoforo Landino, the author of the most famous commentary on the Commedia of the 15th century, commenting on Canto 29 of the Inferno, from which we started, had written that, I quote, "Although the poet rightly condemns alchemy, which is an operation of art in metals in imitation of nature, nevertheless it should be noted that not every kind of alchemy is entirely illicit. In fact," Landino argued, "there are two kinds of alchemy, one which is true, capable of producing metals equivalent to natural ones, and therefore lawful, and the other that is denominated sophistical, which limits itself to externally imitating nature and is therefore illicit. The position of Varchi, who knew Landino's work well and appreciated it, is different, as we saw. According to him, even the art of the counterfeiter is susceptible to being used for opposite purposes. If sometimes it serves ugly and almost diabolical operations, which motivates its persecution by legislators, at other times it can be directed to a good end. That is to say, put at the service of beautiful and almost divine operations. The nature of the latter remains unknown. However, as it has been written, it is highly significant that Varchi gives a positive role to sophistical alchemy, the very category in which the alchemists place the visual arts themselves. In fact, by treating Alchemia Sophistica in a positive light, Varchi may have made it easier for others trying to span the visual arts and alchemy to see a bridge between the disciplines rather than sinking on the divide between transmutation and representation. Benvenuto da Imola, starting from the case considered specular and virtuous of Dante, the poet capable of imitating everything, had ended up re-evaluating, albeit implicitly, the transfiguring work of Capocchio, the alchemist reduced to being a forger. Is it possible, and with this question I conclude, that an analogous consideration, starting from the value of the mimetic arts, as capable as the perfective arts of extracting the forms from matter, has somehow led Varchi to re-evaluate sophistical alchemy? Thank you for your attention.